But I think that's the whole point is not just coming down like a ton of bricks and actually trying to find out a little bit more, because we in turn have to be able to explain it to our guests and customers that are saying, why the hell don't you have this anymore? We loved it. Well, we have to say, well, it's kind of against our values. What we're trying to do here is be completely dictated by the sea.
Hey everybody, it's Dani Valent here with you, and I am super happy to be with you for an episode of Dirty Linen. I'm recently back from the Grounded Farming Festival at Yan Yan Gurt West in near Deans Marsh, west of Geelong in Victoria. This festival is run by Matthew Evans and a dedicated, small, endlessly energetic team, and we had a few pods leading up to the festival talking about it. So one with Matthew Evans himself, we mentioned it with Felice Jacka, a nutritional psychiatrist, and also with Jenna Abratzese, a chef turned lamb farmer who is farming near Ballarat. All those people were at the festival along with 700 or so other people, a lot of farmers, and a lot of small and larger landholders, people working in the academic side of things, scientists, soil scientists. There was a guy who was, you could do a workshop where you could listen to the sound of soil. The event was hosted on Yan Yan Gurt West Farm, as I mentioned, by the Stewart family, a generational family, the fourth and I'll get this wrong, but like the third and fourth generations, I think, are running the farm, and you can see the fifth generation there running around with the sheep. It was a really inspiring, warm, exciting couple of days. I was fortunate to MC one of the tents with a bunch of different speakers talking about everything from farmer well-being to how calculating carbon mass can lead to conservation in developing countries. There was someone from Carolyn Hall, the CEO of the Malone Institute, which works with landholders large and small on water management in a changed landscape. There was so much to process. It was one of those festivals where there's a lot of things happening at once, and even as I was doing as much as I could, I still felt like I missed out on so much. But I think the thing that I've come away with most is a bit of hope and a sense of energy about it's great for 700 people to be there. They're probably a little bit preaching to the converted, although there was certainly some challenging of ideas as well. But I think the trick with something like that is, how does it now percolate? What do people take from it out into the world to create change so that this world is a safer, happier, richer, more biodiverse and productive place for us all to live and thrive? So that is the trick. And I suppose for myself personally, to be a storyteller at an event like that is an absolute privilege, because I felt like I want everyone to instantly come on this podcast and also to be in stories that are now, fizzing away in my busy little brain. It's amazing to be, to be able to go to something like that. As well as emceeing a tent, I was on a session and that was about, convened by Deepa Jayapalan, who I met first when she worked at Vic Health. She's convened this under the umbrella of Regen Melbourne, which is an amazing organisation looking at what it really means for Melbourne to define itself as a great food city. What does that actually mean? How do we retain that? How do we make meaning out of that? She's moving on to this awesome initiative called Good Food Purchasing Australia, which looks at the enormous budgets that institutions, whether it's government or hospitals or education, have to purchase food, and then looks at those supply chains. People who buy a lot of food don't necessarily buy it local, and they don't necessarily buy it thoughtfully. So this project is looking at how money can be spent more meaningfully around food. How can it support how can it support the good things that are going on locally? I think, this is another time. I say the pandemic was one big time, but the current fuel crisis is another big time that people are thinking about food security and where our food comes from and what outside influences can impinge upon our meals. So it was, So anyway, Deepa's conversation and Deepa's definitely coming on the pod. It was about the disconnect between city and country, and I think I was playing the role of the unaware city girl, which I was happy to slot into. And my provocation, which I discussed, was food in the cities has to look really beautiful. That's all people care about. They don't want to know where it's coming from. They don't want to know an origin story. And so we talked around that. It was a great discussion, as was so many of the discussions there at Grounded. So you can probably hear that I'm pretty fired up. Which I think I always am, but I think I've just had so many voices in my ears over the last few days that I'm, even more energized to keep having the big conversations and try to piece things together so that, we all have a greater understanding and connection and, can live connected lives as humans on this planet that we all share. Big stuff, right? But I reckon food does lead you to the big stuff. So let's talk. Let's move on to today's guest and let him have him tap into this conversation, because I know all these ideas are things that Stephen Nairn thinks about as well. So Stephen is a return guest to Dirty Linen. We love that. We will put a link to our conversation from a few years ago in the show notes. In that conversation, we chatted about Stephen's career from Scotland to New York to Melbourne, where he now leads an amazing portfolio of restaurants in South Yarra. Omnia and Yugen are there, as well as their little offshoots. And he recently, in summer, opened up Portside, a seafood retail business at Prahran Market, which has really changed the face of seafood retail by thinking about fish and other seafood as seasonal products, as products with a story, as products that have come from somewhere. In Australia, we do eat a bit of seafood. Like, it's a sort of on parity, I think, with how much beef we eat per capita, which is around 12 to 15 kilos a year per person. It's extraordinary to think about this when we're an island nation, that more than 60% of that is imported, which seems quite extraordinary. So anyway, Stephen knows more about all of this than I do. So, Steve, welcome back to Dirty Linen.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Delighted to return. Sounds like a hell of a trip you were on at the festival there.
There is no conversation that you can't have with food as the lens, don't you reckon?
Yeah, and it's a great connector. Doesn't matter where you are in the world. I think that's something that really does bring everyone. Everyone has experience in it, whether it's from just enjoying food or eating food, or we all need it, we all want it, we all crave it. So I think it is the probably the last true connector that everyone can kind of come around and almost collaborate and or even just, communicate.
Yeah, so true. So, Stephen, give us a bit of the backstory to Portside. Maybe talk about, your connection to produce and, the way that you think about it as a chef.
Yeah, so I think Portside kind of came about. Obviously, I've been a chef for over 20 years, predominantly in Scotland and, and as you said, in New York and in Australia. And I kind of restaurants, we use an enormous amount of product, whether it doesn't matter what it is, but, those main groups that you talked about, things from the land and things from the sea. So you have, over a period of time, you really do become quite familiar with not just the actual species, but the differences in quality. But as longer you go as a chef, you do become aware of the impact of like, you know, what we're a big contributor to you know, some of the pluses and some of the negatives. So that was really kind of had always been playing on my mind. And I think, like with fish, with especially where Portside came around, was I think over my career I've always kind of had a direct line to not all growers or farmers, but it's the main people that would be supplying the restaurant, whether it's meat, poultry to some degree, and vegetables. You know, I often see you down at the farmers market on a Saturday, and those kind of core people that I would build dishes and menus around. But with the seafood, is not the same level of relationship. There's always someone in between, and I found that frustrating. I understand how that happens, but not to the extent that it did. I was really, you know, whenever usually I'll go home back to Scotland for a few weeks in the winter in Melbourne to see my family, and when I would be going around Scotland and France and Spain, I was like, how energetic the seafood is in terms of how it's sold, how it's retailed, how the people make you feel when you're actually like browsing. You know, there's, rather than the kind of transactional, there's that more kind of like, well, what are you trying to do? What are you doing with it? And I that was kind of playing in my mind of like, you know, it'd be great if there was more things like that in Melbourne, especially. And from there, then I kind of started, you know, thinking of a few ideas. I then, like, as I would be chatting through with guests in the restaurants, a common thing would be always said like, well, you know, I only do my seafood eating in restaurants because I can't get this stuff. And I started to kind of look around, and some things were true and other things I think, you know, so. But then I really started to think of like, well, the one main thing I started to see was the majority of the product was the same. There was not much variance or differentiation between seasonality compared to like when I started to actually connect with some of these fishers. What I was hearing from them was very different to what I was seeing, you know, available. And then from there, I started to really deep down and think about it and look at like how much fish we were actually sourcing, buying. And I thought, you know what, maybe it's time to give this a bash and see if we can do something. Like we obviously have Yugen. Yugen is an omakase. Yugen's a very busy restaurant. It's, you know, there's a big fish focus there, and in Omnia and in our event spaces. And then it was really the other driving factor was quality. I understand the process of the larger, more historic legacy kind of fish distribution, fish retail, fish, you know, wholesale. I understand where that would come from, but once I actually started to connect the quality, there was a clear difference, and that was mainly due to the logistics, the length of time getting it, the handling. And that's where I then started to, you know, which I think I'd always felt but wasn't able to kind of communicate or conceptualize for something that other people might enjoy to use, was that I don't think that premium is the species. Premium is the actual handling, and it's the way that it's from A to B to then to the guest or the customer in the store. And that it's not necessarily just the species of fish, whether it's, you know, coral trout or, you know, in season at the moment, the wild barramundi or some beautiful red emperor. But these more humble fish are often overlooked. But by working very, very closely and being much more closer and much more direct and cutting out things like road freight and looking for more creative ways of how to get the product much, much quicker. Once I began the testing, it was an absolute no-brainer. And then I thought the next step of Portside was, okay, but how how can this be useful to the consumer? And then I decided to I think like we wanted to just bridge the gap a little to make things a little bit more easier. And immediately I could, like when we opened the shop, I could see that was something people were interested in, as opposed to there's lots of other champions across the globe that have really moved fish knowledge on, and things like dry filleting, how water contact and how it's by deploying these techniques. I think the proof was in the pudding, and people could immediately start to see that like looks very, very different. And then the final component was linking the guest experience, like how, because that was we'd done a lot of we gathered a lot of feedback, and there was word kept coming up, intimidated, a little bit scared to ask questions, because a lot of the times, unless it's on a high street kind of retail location, but in a market environment, they can be quite busy and fast paced moving. And I think people were like, "Oh no, but I want it like the way it looks here in the restaurant, but I don't want to ask them because they want." And immediately I knew that was something we had to change, and then we had to really not preach or be I don't know, have any form of arrogance whatsoever. Like some people want lots of information, some people don't. But to be able to actually talk about the fish and like why we don't have certain things that our other competitors have, because our whole mantra is we only offer what they catch. So when it's best in class at that period of time, we're giving them the correct price, and in return, our product is hours out of the water rather than days, and that just ignited a pure passion to keep. Once I peeled back a little bit, I saw lots of different avenues and places where we can make a very small impact, but a meaningful one at that.
So good. So many threads that you've dangled that I could pick up on. Maybe let's talk about the species, because, I mean, if I think about, fish in restaurants, it is pretty same. There's at the sort of mid-market level, there's always going to be salmon. It's a very, so Atlantic salmon from Tasmania usually, sometimes king salmon from New Zealand. It's a very consistent product. There are also, many environmental concerns about how it's farmed. There'll often be kingfish as a crudo, and there'll often be barramundi. Maybe in a more of a bistro setting, there'll be some kind of flatfish like a dory or something. But it sort of gets a little scant after that. Like there's not much adventurousness with species in food service. And I can assume, I mean, there's so many reasons for that, but like I would say sourcing for sure, skills in filleting and cooking, but a large part of it would be what customers are going to order and eat. There is a lot of there's a lot of nervousness around fish. Like, is it going to be okay? I don't know, a lot of lack of awareness. And then if you go to fishmongers, as you say, like it's pretty same as well. There'll be some flathead and maybe a snapper and definitely some salmon and some squid rings and a bit of barramundi. But yeah, we know that the seas are much more diverse than what's represented on on the plate and in the retail shelves. So, I mean, maybe talk a bit more about some of the species that you like to highlight.
Yeah, look, you have. I mean, I can touch on the species, and I could probably also, from a chef's perspective, maybe provide some kind of why I think. Oh, look, you did hit the nail on the head. Like those species in most restaurants, and there is a lot of contributing factors to that. One is price. Second is yield. like, and and storage does play a part. And the other thing is the consistency, not necessarily consistency of quality, which for me is consistency of quality is more important than consistency of species. Because in restaurants, I think you need to be a very experienced chef to be able to run your kitchen, have confidence in what you're doing, to be able to pivot. Some chefs just cannot handle that. They just cannot handle that. They need to know what they're getting when they're getting it. They don't like change. It does take a lot of experience then to not know what you're walking into. I can touch on some of that later, and the challenges that when I was implementing Portside into our structure that came up that I wouldn't have necessarily thought of came up, and then had reflected. The other one is also some restaurants are confined by what their guests are willing to pay. That's a massive one. There's no yield of fish. Not every restaurant is geared towards being able to utilize absolutely everything. They don't have the space, they don't have the labor structure, and they don't have the outlet. If they're in an a la carte restaurant, it's very, very difficult then if a typical a la carte menu is between 22 and 28 units of anything on a menu. There's probably most likely between 6 and 8 opportunities to have a fish-based product, whether it's a snack, a canapé, an hors d'oeuvre, or an entree, or a main course. There's a limited section for them to go into, and there's a limited price point for them to fall into. So some, depending on their experience or knowledge of the market or what's going on, they will potentially more lean towards these products and maybe justify that by, well, that's what people want. I think there is a certain degree of that. There is also not every chef that is writing the menu or running the place is the owner. And sometimes they may have pressure from someone saying, look, no, we're not putting yellow eye mullet on. No one knows what the hell a yellow eye mullet is. Despite that being one of Victoria's, when I done my research, yellow eye mullet used to be one of the most celebrated fish in Victoria. When was the last time you saw that on a menu? We received some from Corner Inlet from a fisherman called Luke and Ada a couple of months ago. It was so pristine that I was like, this is wild. And it was funny to actually see some engagement in the store, and the team relaying back to me. People that were in their 60s and 70s were like, whoa, yellow eye mullet. But in restaurants, that's maybe not known. And I think it's about, it's the ratio of expertise and experience, and then being actually able to offer it in some form in your restaurant. From the consumer perspective, it's things that are like, if you look at like lots of the big food-based media and say that have recipe columns or that are published things, you're not seeing a lot of those obscure, they're lesser, no, obscure is a bad word, lesser is a bad word as well, uncommon species, things like, I don't know, different variations of mullets, or different variations of even flatheads, or things that are like barcods, or these kind of things, because they're writing the recipe thinking that the people don't have access to this. As a kind of like complex issue that these fish don't get as much exposure. And like even things like just scorpion fish, and these they maybe think, oh, that looks a bit tricky, whereas something like a John Dory probably feels a little bit safer. And then so there's that comfort, and that, again, that kind of like, I know what to do with it, as opposed to I don't know what to do with it. And that's where with Portside we've tried to deploy certain technique, whether it's deboning or stuffing, or actually providing them the recipe, or providing supporting enhancers like stocks, sauces, butters, things that can kind of help them on the journey to show them that, hey, this is no different to pan frying a piece of barramundi. It's just with this, you want to do this. This is how we would do it. You don't have to do it. And then of course, there's in the wholesale market, there, when the big players, majority of people probably still buying their fish from like Coles and Woolies, and you're not going to see any variation bar 6 species in with those guys. It's going to be vacuum packed. It's going to be it's going to be cut in a weird fashion that's like doesn't actually enhance cooking. When something the way that the fish is cut, when you cook it, it tightens, like that, bizarre things like that. So people are just not had that level of exposure, and I think that's probably the trifecta of why you probably commonly find your flounder, your John Dory, your Humpty Doo barramundi, your kingfish, and salmon. Yes, to a certain degree, salmon's by far the biggest purchase fish in Australia. Is something insane. Like you touched at the start of the pod about the average Australian's beef consumption's 15 kilo per annum. I think salmon is 2 kilos, so that's quite a lot. And I spoke with a dietitian myself, and she was explaining to me that the information points that they have to be able to angle information around like switching from maybe red meat, or people who are now trying to go back onto gluten-based meals, moving into enjoying fish. She was saying we really only have information points on like 6 species.
Wow, that's so interesting. Because
and that all kind of came round to looking for other kinds of species, and by talking to the fishermen, like a lot of the stuff these guys would be like, oh, have you seen this? I'm like, no, I've never seen it. And when it would come, I'd be like, this is phenomenal. We got to use this. And just different things. So I think that's my thoughts on like why things don't look as diverse as they actually are.
I think one thing that people are concerned with is sustainability. They want to buy something that isn't depleting stocks, and that information is also you can probably find someone who's saying this is good, and then someone else is saying no, you're not allowed to eat that. How do you negotiate that or navigate that space?
Yeah, so we did do good consultation with like Good Fish and other organisations like that. But then we actually went out on the water, and we've not got all the way around Australia yet. But I think like with that, you've kind of got to do your research, and I think by understanding the journey needs to be a kind of open-ended one, as opposed to you need to. I don't think you can. For example, you touched on huge problems in Tasmania with salmon farming. I actually met with one of the big players last week, because they were inquiring why we won't put it in Portside, and they invited me to come down and see the full thing, which I will do, because I think when it comes from that, like I'm certainly not a marine biologist, I'm not a scientist. I'm trying to understand, like, okay, so there is this massive play, which is things like what you've seen in Western Australia and potentially in South Australia or Port Phillip Bay, with fishing bans or changes of certain things, are all about regulations of certain species or grouped species. But by working with our approach, it's literally like, okay, well, we'll only take what they're getting there and then, as opposed to to try and minimize any kind of impact. We'll know who the people are. We'll go and meet with them. We'll understand, like, what's their impact? Are they long line fishing? Are they dredging? Are they trawling? Are they using a Persian net? Do they have an ice slurry? Like, how do they package it? What are they, where are they fishing? What's going on there? So I think, like, our approach to that is asking questions. And I think that's the first step. Like, I had a huge, barrage of talking points when I was talking to some of the salmon people, and I was actually surprised by how not combative, but how much they were like, well, we think that's bullshit. Where you've got that information, like with this product, talking about. I was very concerned by the antibiotic scandal. And they're saying this is the same that's used in all livestock. There's no beef farming that wouldn't have this. From there, I think that's where you have to be able to actually have a conversation, because who am I to go like, well, that's bullshit. I need to then go and connect with other people and say, hey, I had this really interesting chat. Is this true? We don't have all the answers, but the whole reason for Portside was, we want to be closer to the action, and we can't just. We've got to do the research. We've got to do it, and that comes from actually trying to figure out what is going on, as opposed to just taking one piece of information and then rolling with it as gospel. Where I don't, like, if I had taken certain things about logistics of fish and why we can't get certain species into Melbourne, or from Port Welshpool to Melbourne on a certain day, if I didn't do independent research there, we would never have got half of the things that we've got. Where I actually had to go like, okay, well, they're moving like 50 tons. I'm trying to move kilos, not tons. So how can we get, and that's the approach that we've got. We're on a learning journey ourselves, and then we need to pivot. And like, when we find it, if we're consulting someone like Good Fish and they're saying, what, the fresh, the actual Australian salmon, not king salmon, Australian salmon from this region, we think it's overfished, population's in danger. Here's the supporting evidence. Then we consult wherever, and we would act upon it. But I think that's the whole point, is not just coming down like a ton of bricks, and actually trying to find out a little bit more, because we in turn have to be able to explain it to our guests and customers. They're saying, why the hell don't you have this anymore? We loved it. Well, we have to say, well, it's kind of against our values. What we're trying to do here is be completely dictated by the sea. And if you see with what happened in Western Australia, like that. That's was so intense, to literally have multiple people who are providing huge amounts of jobs. The kind of tap turned overnight with no pathway to pivot or thingy. I think is also a big talking point as well, because I can understand that, okay, if the science is showing this, but there is also the other. We have to be able to get to a point where transitions are happening with as minimal damage for the environment, and also people who are contributing massively to community and economy.
Yeah, there's a lot to balance. And for people who aren't aware about the situation in WA, I'm also not going to be able to rattle off the exact stats, but like I think 800 kilometre stretch of coast or coastal fisheries in WA was shut down without much notice or consultation. Basically, decimating the seafood industry in West Australia. And there's a lot of controversy around whether that was the right thing to do to support recovery of fish stocks.
Yeah, I think like the main thing that's very alarming there is the fact that the environmental factor aside, I think that there's a it's completely irresponsible to not have provided prior warning or a pathway for people who are supporting communities, industry, and economy who have families and invested huge amounts to not, the study wouldn't have been happening overnight. And I think but not allowing these people who are so key to the conversation in. From the interactions I've had with a few people who've been heavily affected by it, I think is also very irresponsible.
I think, I love the way that you're not taking received wisdom, that you're chatting to people yourself, and also just not locking yourself into a black and white binary, like this is bad and this is good, because I think one thing about seafood stocks is that they do change, and if it's about farmed fish, the farming methods can change, and they can also be quite different from producer to producer. I think having that having a retail operation where you do have to talk to your customers, and you're asking them to pay for the skill and the sourcing that you're doing, to have that backstory is, I'd say, crucial to the business.
Yeah, we have to be transparent, and that's why there's no point coming out that we have all the answers. That's just nonsense. And I think that it's we're on a journey to find out as much as we can, and with the goal of basically having a product that is best practice, is sustainable in its approach, but ultimately leans back to what all restaurants are about, is fantastic experiences. It brings happiness, and when people are when fish lovers are then getting that, they're kind of like, oh, you know what, that was money well spent. No different to any kind of restaurant where you care what the feeling is at the end. And I think that it will be a never ending journey. You're never going to stop trying to find out more.
The landscape's pretty tricky at the moment for all kinds of producers. With diesel being so expensive, there are a lot of fishing boats that aren't going out, especially into deeper waters, because they just can't make the numbers stack up. There's also the metric that you deal with in the restaurants all the time. Costs are up and spend is down, or people are definitely watching what they spend their money on. Is quality local seafood out of reach for the everyday consumer?
I don't think quality. I personally don't think it is, because again, there's a wide variety. If you're looking at something like calamari, which might be true calamari, that might be on the much higher expensive range. For there is a wide variety of products, such as flathead or tiger flathead, or things that are a little bit more accessible. So I don't think it's necessarily complete and utterly out of reach. As in comparison to everything else, the prices that are charged from Woolies and Coles are crazy. Compared to what you're compared to for what you're getting. I think it's not like it's they're much more accessible now than people who are trying to stand by and deliver a craft product. I don't think the gulf is that different, and I think it's would you rather spend more money knowing that what you're putting in your body is of higher quality? I think yes, there will be certain people that's just not financially viable. Totally understand. But that's across the board, from coffee to restaurant experiences. It's not, but there is a lot of people that do care about where their products that they're buying come from, or what's going into their family home, or what's going into what their children are having, or they do work all week really, really hard to have that, meal on a Friday night or a Saturday night, whether it's at home or in a restaurant with a nice glass of wine and a lovely piece of fish. I think there's still that demand.
So tell me about some of the products that people can come to Portside and get. And I understand it changes frequently. But what are you excited about at the moment?
I mean, there's so much amazing stuff. I mean, I need to just reference my menu right now. I mean, I'm loving some Red Emperor. It's coming from the Whit Sundays. Been absolutely loving, the garfish coming out of calamari, King George whiting. I mean, we actually got some incredible PPs that just came in yesterday. I haven't actually seen, that's something I haven't seen much in Melbourne, PPs. True PPs. I haven't seen them. Sea urchin, unusual things that I'm really enjoying is periwinkles and whelks. Coming from Malakuta, from a guy called Dale Winward. He's a diver. And I think they're just such an interesting product. When we went out on the boat with them, he was literally, we stuck a GoPro on him so we could kind of get an understanding of what was happening under there. It was a brutal day when we went down. And the variety of species within abalone sea urchins, which a lot of these are actually pests. They're munching their way through the grass down there that's under the water. So kind of iconic to that region and plays a big part in the habitat of these species. I'm loving them. Like I also love just the more humble things like that yellow eye mullet. Or a good old piece of flathead, I'm a sucker for coral trout. I do love coral trout. It really is special. So we've been getting some fantastic tuna. A fish that I think needs a little bit more love and a little bit more place on menus is blue mackerel. From Craig Lucas, Sue East Seafoods. It's like absolutely exceptional quality product. It's affordable for chefs. Some reason we've started rolling it through the restaurants. It's doing better now than it originally was. So for some reason, people are quite off put by that. But in Scotland, that is like a staple. Everyone loves mackerel. I would much rather have a nice fillet of mackerel than a tin piece of like a tin salmon. Like, it's a no-brainer for me. And I think that maybe it's people are a little bit intimidated by that, but the quality is just absolutely, second to none. So yeah, there are a few of my highlights at the moment. I could go, there's so many different variety things that are kicking around. Like even this morning, we had so many different kinds of cod. That we're getting there are reef species because the big thing that we've kind of not touched on is weather. Weather is like the be all and end all of the fish game. Is fuel prices and things are one thing, but weather is on another life. And these guys really, it's so difficult for them. It's not like they can just go out when they want. And sometimes they're out on, I'd say, relatively small boats, and it's pitch black. Like they're out at like 2 a.m. It's like completely pitch black, and that is serious graft. And I think that I don't know where I was going with that, but I mean, there's so much. There's such incredible variety, especially in the window at the moment.
What would you like people to know about fishers? Like about the people that go out and catch it for us? Like
it is extreme graft. Like it is, they are working 24/7. They're really battling the elements. They often do not get a fair shake. They often are, if they have to send all their product to market, it's a quantity game. And they don't have a lot of power when it comes to that in terms of pricing. Sometimes they'll get the best of the pricing, and sometimes they might get a lower. It's not guaranteed. It's called fishing, not catching. Like they might go out, but there's no guarantee that they're going to get. They could do a 7, 8, 10, 12 hours on the water and get nothing. Get very, very little. They're also working under strict quotas, and they're highly, highly, highly regulated. I don't think people understand like how the impact that they are. Like they're really, really heavily scrutinized, and they're held to really tight regulations. So they're working within a lot of boundaries, and there's fierce competition out there as well. So I think that they are kind of unsung heroes, and it is incredibly difficult. The ones that are then going on to produce product at a really high level, and from the handling perspective, these guys are on another level. It's graft beyond belief. It's care. It's precision. It's a ticking clock. The moment they've got the fish out of the water, the clock is going, and it's really, really challenging. A lot of them as well they're multi-generational, and it's quite inspiring to see how they operate. I was definitely impressed with some of them with the work ethic, battling the elements. It's not easy. It's not glamorous. It's not recreational fishing. They're not out on a boat with 6 cans of beer and, a couple of sandwiches and just, with the tunes on. They're really up against it. And it's even just things like when they have to repair, netting or line structures, it's physical.
I mean, and when you talk about the generational nature of a lot of these fishing enterprises, it makes sense that they want there to be fish for tomorrow.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. And the guys that I've worked with are fully with that, and they're fully supportive of that. They're not. I've never heard any of these guys that we work with say like, it's quotas are bullshit and we should be able to do this. Not a single person. Not a single person. They are well aware. They're well aware that the ocean has sustained their community and their family for a period of time. They're highly respectful. And a lot of these guys, that's why they'll be very selective on who they give the fish to, because it's they take so much care and pride in the product. Like they're really going through the rigor of from water to how it's packaged to how it gets delivered. They care so much, and that is got to be respected.
Yeah. Well, I remember a trout that I bought from Portside that had the curry leaves on it, and it was boned out, and it was so easy. I just had to put it in the oven at 180 for 25 minutes, and then just look like an absolute hero when I presented it to my friends for a little dinner party. I mean, what's the satisfaction for you in adding this arm of retail to what you do?
Well, there's loads of satisfactions. It's really goes through many verticals. Like for me as a chef, I think it's super important to train other chefs. There's a whole, when I think back to being a young chef, like bar things that were over, maybe 100 kilos, such as beef or things like, everything was pretty much whole. We were really, really, we learned our proficiency with knife. Wastage was like number one topic. We had no wastage. And I think now, because, the Restaurant Award in hospitality for labour is extremely difficult to manage. I think businesses, restaurants, hotels, things have had to find other ways to stay within the laws and do right by the business, by their employees, and by everyone. And one thing I definitely think has probably suffered would be whether the fish comes whole. It probably starts off of, scaled and gutted, then it maybe moves into filleted, then it maybe moves into portion control when you're doing the big numbers. So that there's a big satisfaction from us being able to then show our even our experienced people, but our younger people that are there, the whole process. They're seeing the fish coming in full rigor mortis, whether it's a snapper, or a red emperor, or a 50 kilo tuna, or or an alpine trout, or live mud crabs, or marins, or peepees, sea urchins. The variety, it's the exposure, and that actually personally does give me a lot of satisfaction, because I know that then that is valuable, even if they don't know it now. I know that when they are traveling around or going from, they won't see that abundance of product. Then the other one is, when I look at the shop, sometimes I look at the display in the window. It does kind of remind me of home a little bit, where I see that there is things like the dressed fish, and whether it's a butterflied fish or something, or it's a king prawn or a scampi or a marron that's been, prepared for the barbecue, or an octopus that we've put on a skewer, so it's already tenderized, it's ready for people to go, or a dressed mud crab, or a dressed, blue swimmer crab. Seeing people see something they've seen on TV or in a cookbook or on a YouTube video or an Instagram, and then being able to actually do the thing they wanted to do with a massive bit that's been a big helping hand, and then them coming back and being like, "Oh man, we followed the recipe. It was amazing. I'd done it. I'd done it for my wife. She thought I'd done it all. It was so good." Like we talked, that has given us, and even just simple things like oysters. Oysters were a big problem for me because I just could not understand, why are the oysters sold opened in those trays in Australia? Why is that? They're rinsed under a tap. They're, I just, there's no enjoyment in eating that. There's absolute, when you've had an oyster that's just been opened, compared to one that's been sitting dehydrating back in a shell, might be the same shell, might not be the same shell, rinsed under a tap, beaten, chopped up. There is no, that is not the same product as when you go on a lease. I was up in Merimbula, and they took us all out on the leases, which tasted so much different, so many things, and the flavor explode. It's like drinking, the difference of drinking, wine that I would make in a Jimmy rig in my house compared to a Grand Cru wine is, the products, you're paying the same price. It's get the oysters that are closed. And Europe had never seen that. In Scotland or in France, had never seen that. The oyster was opened. If you ordered the oysters, they would say, "Yeah, do you want them opened and banded?" The oysters traditionally over there look more like an Ungazi oyster. It's like a larger kind of shell as opposed to a Sydney Rock or a Pacific. But they would band them, and then you take them home, but they're still full of life, to a certain degree, as close as you can get. So yeah, that was something that kind of blew my mind. So I get a lot of satisfaction in people just with the oysters telling me we got them. The yours are a couple bucks more expensive than everyone else, but we actually have on our place card, the location, who produced it, and then a QR code that takes you to the lease information, which has a flavor profile and to help them select. And small things like that gives me a lot of satisfaction. And I also get a lot of satisfaction now. I'm a dad, from the families that come to the shop, and they're like, they care about, even something like we do. We'll have, flathead that will crumb, and a combination between we take all the dried herbs in the restaurants like shiso and tarragon and make a powder, combine it with, tarragon and crumble them. So there's a little point of difference. It's just elevating it a touch without taking over. And they're like, man, these are so good because it's an actual medallion of fish. It's not something that's been forced into kind of nugget shape. And it's a fancy fish finger. It's a Gouger and it's a Brandad. But the product is the quality is there. And when they come back, and there's a kind of little bit of a bonding moment where they're like, yeah, you were right. The quality is, we can taste it. That gives me a lot of satisfaction, and we're on the right path.
Love it. Stephen, let's leave it there because there's plenty more fish in the sea. We could talk all day. But thank you so much for chatting about Portside today. And maybe I should come down to Tassie with you. I would love to see what's going on down there as well.
That's a good show. They'll be a bit conservative from bringing down the big guns, but I
don't think that's me. But I'd be interested. Let's actually have a look.
Absolutely. I want to know. I want to see.
Yeah.
But and who knows? Could be a series.
Definitely. All right. Thanks so much for the chat.
All right, no problem at all. Thank you.
This is Dirty Linen. I'm Dani Valent. We bring you untold stories from the food world. Real, raw, unafraid, hopeful. We're driven by a belief that food provides endless opportunities for learning, connecting, and creating the world we want to live in. Delicious, open-hearted, meaningful. If you know a story that needs telling, get in touch. Write to dirtylinen@deepintheweeds.com.au. Thank you for listening.
This is a Deep in the Weeds production.